Welcome to a new episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. You're with Steve Wiss and Jonathan Faduba. It has been quite some time, so apologies to you loyal listeners, but it has been a hectic old year for both of us in more ways than one. But I'm delighted to have Jonathan alongside me here. And congratulations, Jonathan, on completing your uni course. How's it going, my man?
Good evening, everyone. Hello, good day, wherever you are in the world. Yes, from now on, Steve, I'd like you to address me as Jonathan Faduba, MBA. That is my new official title. Now I'm doing well. It's as you just mentioned there, top of the show. It's been a crazy year or so, on and off the field, as they would say in football. Finished my course. The project is done. Everything is done. I'm finished. I'm free. I'm a free man. So I'm delighted to be back on the podcast with everybody, and obviously just want to firstly say thanks to everyone for their patience over the last year or so, maybe with the shows. But we are back, as they say, Steve, for a little bit.
Yes, exactly. That's the good thing. We've just about got in time before the end of the season. There's 4 games left in Sweden. There's half a dozen left in Norway. There's loads of Europa games. They go on until January now. So we can't have a winter break this year. We've got to keep cracking on. But I mean, it's been. I know you've been working very, very hard, basically, in the last year and a half. In this, and I know it's taken a lot out of you. So, I've been fascinated to hear behind the scenes about what's been going on with you on this particular MBA and. What's it been all about? Because you've been doing a lot of sort of football-related content.
Yeah, well, there's the course is a 1-year course. So it's basically like doing a degree in 3 years. A 3-year degree, sorry, in 1 year. So it's a full-time course. I was obviously working as part alongside that as well to sustain my living. Moved up to Liverpool. So spent the year there and essentially was working doing a football industry MBA, University of Liverpool Management School. So that just entails there's loads of different modules. So a lot of basically every week you've got some assignment to be writing thousands of words every week, pretty much, or every other week. And it varies. The course varied. For example, looking at sports law, there was a module on sports law where I had to look at, for example, player grading. And particular module, I looked at the regulations around the GBE, the Brexit regulations, essentially. There was a module about football and finance, Steve. So there was one where I spent a good few weeks digging into Leeds United's finances, doing the balance sheets.
Not a good look if it was a certain era, but
income statements and learning all about that, the account side of football with Kieran Maguire, actually, who does the Price of Football podcast. He was my lecturer, a legend of a guy. So doing going into deep finance stuff. There's strategy, innovation, business, leadership. So all kinds of things related to football and some not related to football, just general business. So it's been a really, really, really challenging course. In terms of this podcast and how it relates to this podcast, I was fortunate enough, actually, my final, obviously when you finish the classes, which finished around March, April, you then go into your final dissertation period. So I was fortunate enough to do a consultancy-based project, which means that you get to work with an organization and look at your area of expertise. And for me, my area of expertise for this chosen project was around player recruitment. So I've literally just 3 months more, Steve, doing a consultancy-based project for a team in Sweden, and basically looking at player recruitment and just like Sweden as a kind of country and what the player recruitment and labor migration flows are like in Sweden. So that's been a really interesting and fun project. I spent a bit of time in Sweden in September. Unfortunately, I had some family personal news as well that delayed the project slightly. So that it meant it was just a really, really hectic and intense period of time to try and get the whole work done. Unfortunately, due to bereavement, but I've managed to get it all done, Steve, and to the listeners, of course, like I say, and hopefully I've learned a few things along the way as well. So, now on to the next chapter, I suppose.
A smarter, more clued up JF than he already was. That sounds like a bit of a beast, really, in footballing terms. And it's very interesting that you managed to sort of combine or insert your passion of the Scandinavian areas into this MBA. So a Swedish club. What more can you say? Can you reveal any more to us?
Well, I haven't actually presented the final findings to the club itself yet, so that's still to come. That's the final thing of this MBA to do, which is obviously meet the club and present my findings based on what they asked me to do. But I am allowed to say the university has given me permission to say the club. It is IFK Gothenburg. So we had to organize it ourselves, obviously. So it involved me approaching the club and it's from myself to them, if that makes sense. It's not necessarily it's not like they've hired me necessarily, but I obviously pitched my ideas to them in terms of what I was looking to do and suggested how I would approach my project. And they liked what I had to say of the proposal. So they allowed me the opportunity to do it. Obviously, it's not employment. It's not like I'm not working for them or anything like that. It's just a project. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I worked with the club obviously for 3 months. I am allowed to say that. There's certain things I'm not allowed to say. Obviously, I'm not allowed to go into the findings. That's under confidentiality, Steve. But in terms of what I was reviewing and looking at, but of course, what I can say is obviously I was looking in the area of international player recruitment and kind of how that's been done in the past and maybe how that could be done in the future, just based on the things I've learned across the course in areas like innovation, like I say, leadership management, organization, strategy, that kind of thing. So for me, it's been really fun. I've read so many academic papers, Steve. I mean, I've got an academic paper here about migration recruitment into Norwegian football just on my desk here. I've been looking at sort of African football, global value added chains and labor migration flows. So a lot of technical academic stuff, Steve, so much paperwork. And I did a qualitative analysis, which basically meant I had to speak to people at different organizations across the world, essentially. So my research took me all around the world, Steve, on literally talking to people at clubs in Japan, clubs in Africa, all over, like academies, the Balkans, Brazil. So Cyprus, for example, like I had some of the research was done around looking at player recruitment flows in USA and the Caribbean. So I have to say that I've learned a lot, and it was a really challenging project. But I'm just delighted to get it done. It was really intense, I'm not going to lie. Hopefully it will provide the club value, but of course we'll see where that goes from here. But it was really fun to say I was in the club. The people involved at the club who were really welcoming. I worked at quite a high level with the people involved at the club. And so I spent some time in Sweden reviewing some of their processes and that kind of thing. But I don't know how much I can say, but hopefully that gives a bit of a taster of it.
I think you just had enough of me moaning about EF Core so often, and you thought, I'll approach them and try and sort them out myself here just to shut Steve up.
Well, I know you're a big fan, so I thought.
No, very, very, very interesting indeed, and hopefully, let's see what happens with the future with Mr. JF in that sort of department. But it's been a very intense period for you, and it's good to have you back here as together on the Nordic Football Podcast. It's been a busy period for myself as well. I've been, for those who do follow me regularly, I'm often on live now each day, or a lot of days, on the Betting Weekly Live from the Up Because We Win YouTube channel. Obviously I've been keeping clued up with the Scandinavian game. I was even allowed to give a couple of tips actually from those regions on some shows, even though top 4 leagues are preferred. Couldn't help myself, and we're going to get back into it here. Sweden then with 4 games to go. Allsvenskan on the table. Looks like the league title's wrapped up with Malmo, 57 points on the board, 47 points for Hammarby Jordgart. And there's more interest, I think, in the European positions and the relegation battle, which has been very, very close. Just a quick word on IFK, by the way. IFK Göteborg, sorry. They have become this random under 2.5 team, which has shocked me because the manager previously was quite a frantic coach involved in a lot of wild sort of contests. And to be fair, I think there've been matches that should have had a lot more goals in them, but incredible stats for for IFK Göteborg. I think 8 of the last 10 competitive games have gone under 2.5 goals. I never saw this coming. I mean, what do you put that down to? Is it a case of, they obviously have been struggling in the relegation battle. Every point matters. You scrap hard. It's not about style. It's about results. I think that's ultimately what it is about this year for IFK.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the table, of course, they're currently 11th. They've had some really good results in the previous week before the international break, which has kind of given them a lifeline. Obviously, winning the derby against Gais, massive result really that effectively saved their season. Before that, they're 6 points above the relegation sort of trapdoor now. Without the wins that they've recently had, they would have been in big trouble. Obviously, back-to-back wins against Norrköping away as well. But as you mentioned, Steve, both of those were under 2.5 goals. They haven't actually had an overs game since the derby against Häcken, which was a 3-3 game. They beat Gais, which was obviously their biggest rival, getting a bit of revenge there, obviously having lost to them earlier in the season. There's been a lot going on in the club in terms of recruitment over the summer period, which we've been on and off in terms of shows. So it's difficult to remember where we really left it, but they've had some recruitment. Players like Lindqvist come in, Ramon Pascal Lindqvist, who's done quite well. He got a couple of goals. I think he's got 3 goals now. There's been others as well over the course of the season. They've had a lot of work to do in that sense, obviously since losing Alcuye, who they sold to Brighton for all that money. So club record fee. So they've managed to get themselves out of it. I know Billborn has got a reputation as a sort of really attacking, like you say, goals galore type coach. But I think without sort of, it's difficult for me to talk about a club, obviously, without at this moment in time, without giving away maybe conversations I've had. But the club's currently kind of maybe going through a bit of a transition phase, and I think part of that is obviously they need to stay up, essentially. You know what I mean? Before they can really think about anything else. So I was at the Hammarby game, which they lost 1-0. That was a really interesting game, I have to say. I mean, there was a 97th minute goal, I think, for Hammarby. And at that point, relegation was looking really, they were falling into that trapdoor, of course. And I remember when the goal went in, there was like some fireworks started going off outside the stadium. And it was honestly like, I've never been in a stadium where it just feels like the air just got sucked out when Hammarby broke in the last minute and countered and got a winner. That was after a red card. Obviously, you've gone down to 10 men at that point. But yeah, I mean, I think in this show we're just going to sort of review maybe almost every team, have a few words about each of them, and kind of just recap, and then continue our normal coverage between now and the end of the season. Hopefully, I think EFK have done enough to stay up. I never really feared that they'd go down. If you look at Norrköping now, their recent form has kind of dipped a bit, and now they're below EFK. That was a big game actually, that they lost at home to Göteborg. So Norrköping are now 12th, 3 points above it. Värnamo with a new management, Steve, they're kind of just teetering above it. They've had some decent results under the new manager, of course. They drew at Malmo, they drew with Djurgården as well. So their results have sort of slightly improved. Then you got Halmstad, Kalmar, and Västerås. So I don't think EFK will go down. But yeah, like you say, I don't think the manager's had the chance to really implement that all-out attacking style that maybe he's been known for at Hammarby and, of course, when he was in Norway.
Yeah, I was never going to start you on easy street, Jonathan, straight into the deep end with the EFK. I think I've got to give Billborn some credit, actually, for sort of going against what he normally is known for, adapting. There's some coaches out there who only play one way, which is fine, but I think he's shown good adaptability skills here. And 30 points, I think that's enough. I don't think anyone will get... I think it's enough to stay up already. I mean, I might be wrong there, mathematics and all that, but I'd be surprised if 14th place got 31 points because their goal difference is pretty good as well. We might as well stay at the bottom of the table, actually, while we're on the topic. And Norrköping are the other sort of big club down, or Kalmar as well, really. But Norrköping, it's they are 3 now clear of the drop zone, but they've lost their last 2, not had a win in a while. You actually called this out at the start of the season. To be fair to you, you didn't expect them to be that great, and they haven't been. But we were just speaking off air about potentially off the field problem for them as well. This is the sort of season they just want to get over the line and go home, don't they? And have sit underneath their Christmas tree and work out what they can do for 2025.
Yeah, literally. I mean, when it comes to Norrköping, they've not had a good season, and their results did pick up, of course, in mid-season really, when there was a period of time where it looked like they're heading right way down, and then in the summer, then they managed to pull out 4 wins in a row, didn't they, Stephen? That's basically saved their season. They beat Halmstad, they beat Kalmar, they won away at Gais, and they beat Osteras, which is obviously all the teams down there really, except Gais. But since then, Steve, they've pretty much not won a single game except the Swedish Cup. So they're on a run at the moment of about 7 games without winning. And it's had repercussions in terms of the club in general. So there was some interesting news broke recently where it essentially said that a major sponsor's come out and essentially said they're thinking of pulling their funding from Norrköping. Because one of their biggest sponsors, Platinum Cars, has come out and said they're really unhappy with the season and how it's gone. Which
because
in a way,
they're so bad, basically. That's why they might lose sponsorship.
Yeah, it's that bad that they're thinking of, the sponsors. Wow. I mean, the quote from the sponsor was, obviously they can't cancel it in the middle of their contract. They're going to honor their agreement. But they basically said that, the club is not being run to the values that the sponsors necessarily agree with. And that those must be lived and not just words on a piece of paper. It was the words from Sigrid Biljelbegovic, who is one of the owner of the company. And so, yeah, Steve, they basically threatened to withdraw a double-digit million Swedish kroner amount of funding to the club, which would be a huge blow. And essentially, and I think he's got a point here. I'm just going to read you what it said. It has been the agreement. We have to follow our agreement, but in general, it is far from what we were promised, which is 10,000 every week in the stands and being a top 5 club. And really, when you look at kind of like the table and the attendances, you can't really knock them in terms of what is been promised from the sponsors. So they are a club in a bit of flux. We've talked about them at periods during this season, Steve, when we've had the chance about just off the field and generally in terms of recruitment, losing players, maybe not really replacing players as well, from that point of view with sufficient quality. And as it stands, I thought they'd got out of it in the summer, but now they've got 4 games to save themselves, essentially. Relegation, I don't know if that would terminate the sponsorship effectively. But even if it doesn't, it looks like the sponsors are already looking at this club and thinking, do we want to be here? And don't forget, Steve, Norrköping historically one of the 4 biggest teams in Swedish history in terms of titles won, if you include pre-Allsvenskan era. So yeah, they've got Brommapojkarna at home, Varnamo away, which is going to be huge. Then they've got AIK at home and Djurgården away final game. So I don't know how many points you see them getting out of that, but essentially they have to beat Brommapojkarna, I'd say, this weekend. And I would almost go as far as to say they can't lose to Varnamo. Otherwise, they really will be teetering on the brink.
Well, Brommapojkarna is the easiest game, really, because Bromma are mid-table on the beach there already. But the other matches could end absolutely anything. And I mean, those words from the sponsor there, I mean, that's just code for we don't want to be associated with someone as crap as this. In my books, normally when a sponsor's on about terminating, it's because of a serious incident that's happened. But basically, they've just been so poor. But I mean, it remains to be seen whether they will stay up or not. One team I've got to talk about is Västerås, and I should have started this with if you can name the team that has the 3rd best expected goals in Allsvenskan, but you knew this anyway, and it is Västerås. I have never in all my time, and I've covered a lot of worldwide leagues, Jonathan, I've never known such an underachieving team on metrics, ever. According to
I want to
figures,
pick your brains about. I want to pick your brains on this one. What do you put it down? It's one of those things that you've said to me repeatedly this season when we've done shows. Next pod, I want to talk about Västerås. So now's your chance, my friend, because I've seen them play, but they're not a team I've seen a huge amount of. I actually quite like what they try and do. They're really against it. It's looking like they're not going to survive. But you tell me, Steve, the tale of the tape for this team this season. What are your thoughts? They've got 5 points to rescue in the last 4 games to be able to get out of the automatic relegation.
They've cost me a lot of money this year, Västerås. I've often been on overs in their games, backed them themselves because their metrics suggest there should be a lot more goals in the games. The eye test as well, by the way, when you watch them play, you think, damn, this is a good footballing team. You think, wow, there's going to be goals scored in running. And I just can't work it out, really. I think the best way to describe it is that they just find ways to lose football games or not win them. And it's a bit of a cliche, but in both boxes, they've had problems. I think they've managed to. They don't actually concede that many big chances, but whenever they do, they seem to concede a goal from them. And then, when you're 18 goals short of where you should be, 18 in 26 matches, which is quite frankly absurd. I've never known this in my life. There were some missed penalties early in the season which cost them, but this is basically a case of there's no one in the team who can finish chances. They helped themselves a bit by buying the guy in the summer, Buda. He's looked all right, but just not been able to finish their chances. Best team to go down in terms of style and how they look, probably ever in Allsvenskan. But it's a results game, isn't it?
Your opinion, I mean, they're not actually down yet. So usually when we have these data discussions, there's always that XG regression, isn't there? There's always this debate about XG. Like, does it eventually even itself out? And we've had debates on this show in the past. I remember past years where we talked about it. And there's data skeptics who say, well, it could even out over 5 years. So essentially it's irrelevant. Or there's people who say, no, it's a good indicator because it shows that if you keep going, it will even itself out and you'll be fine. Where do you sit on that curve? Like the Graham Potter debate, wasn't it, at Brighton once?
There's a boss of mine at Because We Win called Nigel Seeley, who's an English league specialist, and he says, and it's quite simple. He's now betting against these teams that are underachieving their XG, and he says it's quite simple. They can't finish their chances. It suggests they haven't got the strikers to score, and maybe he's right. You know what I mean? There's continual teams that always underachieve in that way, and you maybe got to look at the squad and think it's not quite good enough at finishing the chances. But I mean, they're as short as 4-1 to beat Malmo in the next game, and I mean that 4-1 might sound a lot, but they're rock bottom against the team that have won the league near enough. That's not most teams would be 10-1 in this position, so the books still rate them a bit. Will it even itself out? I think it's too late now for them, and I mean they've got Jorgarten on the card, Elfsborg and Hammarby. They're gone. Stick a fork in them. But I've enjoyed watching them play, and Malmo. I think we might as well. I think can they actually win the title at this next match with a win? Yeah, win the game, and they are the champions. So and I expect Malmo to find a way to do it.
Yeah, Malmo are 10 points clear. Obviously, they have got the. We haven't talked about it yet, but the never-ending European leagues, which I do have some opinions about, but we might save them for another day. To contend with Malmo, they've got a big game obviously in Europe coming, but you'd like to think that they have been rotating, but you'd like to think they'd beat the rest. I mean, they are second best, by the way, just for the record, according to our partners Y-Scout. Just want to give a shout out to Y-Scout. Also, Steve, you did a great blog, Y-Scout blog, which you can go and check on Y-Scout's page at Y-Scout on X or Twitter. West are second now in the league for expected goals. They were top at one point
second
during the season. Funny enough, Bromma Poikina are third in the league for XG as well. So it's a really upside down league in terms of expected goals.
Vasteras, by the way, on expected points, were like fourth a few weeks ago on points. They should be fourth in the league. I mean, what?
But should be that's based on XG. I mean, they scored 23 goals, Steve, from 43.91 XG.
I'm lost for words. I'm not. This is honestly such a rare instance. I am genuinely. What on earth their manager must think, because I mean he's coaching them to create these chances, and
he's doing a good job by all accounts, according to you.
I love him. I love what I see, but I don't love the league position.
Well, it's interesting because in the Premier League, if you look at it recently, and actually it applies to the Football League as well. There's been a trend recently, hasn't there, Steve, of managers who prove that they can play an attacking style, getting bigger jobs.
Yeah.
Even if they're not doing well in terms of results. We see it down in the EFL. I can think of a couple of examples. I think if you look at, like, for example, in non-league, the Gateshead manager got the MK Dons job because he was playing a really good style in non-league. Then he's now at Carlisle. Similar thing with MK Dons, the Crawley Town manager, I think, He's now gone to MK Dons. He got promotion. It's maybe this manager. A, we need to get him on the podcast and have a chat with him. But B, he might be putting himself in the shop window for other bigger jobs, because if he can coach a team to get this sort of level of XG, I mean, Steve, just for just got to drop this stat in there before we move on. Halmstad are bottom of the league for expected goals, right? 26 goals from 25.92 XG, right? Which is pretty much bang on expected. And yet, they're bottom of the league for XG, and they still scored more goals than Västerås, who have 43.91. That's 20 goals more that they're expected to score, and yet they've scored less than Halmstad, which is like you said, I've never seen that for my life. But do you have a final sort of? I mean, I'd like to get this guy on our pod, so I'm going to do some digging before they get.
Kalle Carlson.
Do you think, just to ask, just to finish it? Do you think they're down?
Oh yeah, with the fixtures are king, and they're gone. But I just, before I finish with Västerås, there was a match I did win on them this year on an over, and they scored like the last kick of the game. I think it might have been against Kalmar, Simon Johansson. And this was one of the goals of the season. Ironically, this would have been like a 0.01 XG. So what a funny old game football is, mate. But there's not been enough of that for them this season. But I mean, look, if they keep the manager, if they play the same way, surely they absolutely boss Super Etten, right? Next season, surely.
I mean, I think if football's going in the way it is in terms of trends with young managers, I think he'll stay in Allsvenskan with a bigger job, because if you can coach to that level, that implies that better players you'll do better. But you're right, you never know, and maybe he'll be stuck in Super Etten. But listen, I'm gonna do some digging on that. Just to recap, as you've just said there, Malmo home, Djurgården away, Elfsborg away, Hammarby at home to stay up. Good luck, because they need at least 9 points probably.
Who will go down?
I want to move. Sorry,
who do you think will go down? Let's say the bottom two. Who do you think the bottom two will be? I mean, are you writing off Västerås with those fixtures as well?
I think Västerås have gone. I do like them, and from every game I've seen them, they're competitive. You know, they never really get thrashed. There's a lot of 2-1s, 3-2s. You know, if you look at the recent results, Steve, I mean, the only team that's thrashed them is Häcken 4-0 in July. You know, and we're going back a long way here. Pretty much the whole season, in fact. It's pretty much all games.
They probably out XG'd them as well in that game.
Yeah, every game is pretty much by one goal, more or less. You've got to go back to May, leaving aside obviously that Häcken thrashing for a game that they lost by more than one goal. But I think they'll go, and I think Varnamo are going to survive. Actually, the new coach, I think, will keep them up. So it's going to be between Halmstad and Kalmar. I can't call it, because I watched Kalmar Gais when I was in Gothenburg. Kalmar, by the way, have got a good centre back. I really like that Nigerian centre back. But I just looked at them and I was like, you can't create. But then recently, Steve, Dino Islamovic has turned into Pele, because he's scoring for fun now. So I think I texted you during that match saying Dino Islamovic up front.
Yeah.
Because obviously he's had a bit of a tough time in Rosenborg, and Östersunds, he was decent, but maybe didn't hit the heights of what was expected of him. But Steve, he's banging in goals recently. You know, he got one in the most recent game, one before that. 2 before that, so he scored 4 in his last 3. I think it's between Halmstad and Kalmar. I can't call it, Steve. Kalmar, I've got Mjällby at home, Brommapoikina away, IFK away, which is a big game, and then Häcken at home. And Halmstad, who of course, again, they've changed management as well. They've got Sirius at home, Häcken away, Djurgården at home, AIK away, and they don't score many, as we just said there. So I'd probably lean towards Kalmar getting out of it, but I can't call it.
I really felt for Halmstad, the manager who got sacked, because he got sacked on the back of a player missing a penalty in the last minute, basically. Rasmus Wiedersheim Paul. Yeah. The last man you'd really want probably in that situation, in my opinion. I felt really sorry for him, because if that goes in, he probably keeps his job, at least for another week or two. And, you know, I was shocked that you would sack a manager.
He didn't just miss it. I was probably still in the air. He absolutely ballooned it. And it was definitely coming, because he's not the most prolific. If you look at his goal record, I remember we had a little chat about that after that match. But yeah, I think if I may, because we don't have too much time before we move on to Norway. But a lot of the teams here are playing Djurgården, and we're looking at it like a tough game. But if you actually look at the situation at Djurgården, Steve, that's one team we do need to talk about. A lot of rumours that the joint managers will be on their way at the end of this season.
Really?
Real discontent at Diff at the moment. There's been questions to the sporting director, Boss Anderson, about them, and they've been asked themselves, the managers, are they going to stick around? They've got another year on the contract. But some really disappointing results recently, Steve. They've basically collapsed out of the title race with some recent poor results, including getting battered 3-0 by Djurgården in September. Disappointments against Varnamo as well, Steve. The Kalmar game as well at home, failed to beat Kalmar at home. So the rumours, Steve, of a replacement, last I heard anyway, was Per-Mattis Hogma. He'd be an interesting one, wouldn't he?
But I think they crave a title again in Djurgården. And the thing is, I'm convinced that the European exploits have taken the toll on the team. I think they really struggled to play Thursday and then Sunday/Monday. They've done well in Europe. I'll give them some credit there. Put some great performances in. But it has taken its toll. And of course, look, Malmo have been... I mean, Malmo and Glimt look like they're going to win each respective league. And it's really because the first 10 games, express train, out the trap so quickly. And it's so hard to catch. But Djurgården were in a position where they could have done it. But they needed to be kind of a bit faultless for a few weeks, and they weren't. But I mean, look, the dual management thing's always intrigued me there. It's worked very well. And you can't consider it a flop. But yeah, maybe one man again might be a better version. They did just win their last match 6-1, though, in the Swedish Cup against Järfälla. They were a big favourite in that game. Was to be expected. I mean, just say this was the end, the end of the dual managers. I mean, how would you assess that era for them? I mean, they've had success in it, but could it have been, and should it have been better?
It's a good question, actually, because I'm not entirely sure. I mean, a lot of the work I've been doing, Steve, on this course the last year or so is with a view to maybe potentially, working in the club environment, and maybe why not Sweden? Like, I wouldn't be against it. Maybe in a assistant sporting director role, or maybe a loans manager role, or something like that. So if anyone's listening wants to give me a phone call, like, maybe we can talk. But my point is, when you're reviewing like their kind of them as managers, if you were in charge of that decision, like, do you get rid of them or not? My feeling with Diff, Steve, is that they're kind of, it's hard to really say like with tangible evidence that they've underachieved or that they've not succeeded, because I think they have actually done a good job with what they've had available and with the sales they've had to make. Like, they've lost Bergvall, for example, but I still feel like every season there's just a little bit of disappointment, and it does relate partly to what you said about Europe. Even last season, they had a really good season in terms of getting into Europe. They won some really big games, didn't they, Steve? But there's just something missing with the joint managers. I think there's just a bit. It's like the derbies as well doesn't help. They're a little bit disadvantaged, I think, Djurgården, in the sense of like Malmo only have one real proper derby, and that's Helsingborg, and they're not even in the league. Whereas Djurgården, they've got those 4 games per season. It's an emotional toll, isn't it? When you lose to Hammarby or it's like it just adds an extra layer of pressure like that Malmo don't really have. When you look at this season, Steve, there was a period of time where they were in the title race, but then they just threw it away, and now they're 10 points behind, and it's gone, and they're probably going to fall behind. Hammarby are second now, so as it stands, it's looking like. And listen, AIK are only 2 points behind, Steve. I mean, AIK could finish above Djurgården, which I think when you looked at the table 6 months ago, 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago, would be unthinkable. So I do feel like they are coming to a natural conclusion. I don't think they'll stay past this season. I think there's a genuine rumor here. I think there is a genuine sort of looking at it and kind of going, maybe we need a new voice. If anyone did actually watch the derby as well, Steve, I don't know if you saw, with Kim Bergstrand like losing his cool, and the little fight broke out on the touchline, and sometimes things like that as well, just like comments he's made in the past that he got away with, dodgy little comments about Dick.
He did really well to keep his job, I thought.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? There's always been just a little bit of controversy there as well in terms of how he maybe deals with the media at times. Thomas Lagerlöf, obviously, I met him at the in Gothenburg at the start of the season and spoke to him about Lucas Bergvall, which you can listen to on one of the early season shows. But yeah, I've got a feeling, Steve, that it's coming to a conclusion.
Yeah, and I think they might look at the other Stockholm teams and think, do you know what? Mikael Thomasson at AIK is doing really well. Kim Hellberg at Hammarby, very, very good manager. Look at Elfsborg's new manager. He's been brilliant. 5th place Mjällby, we know what a brilliant setup they've got managerial as well. And, you know, they don't want to be left behind. I'm not saying these two dual managers are bad or anything. They've done well, but sometimes you've got to act before, you know, things can get a little bit stale. And especially, I mean, Henrik Rydstrom at Malmo, he was rumored to be second on the list for Brighton this summer. I mean, to be fair, the new manager at Brighton started off really well. I think that bodes extremely well for Rydstrom, who at some point you feel he will outlive Malmo. We need a bridge into Eliteserien. I think the right bridge here is Europe, actually. Massive shout out to all the teams in Sweden and Norway this year. They've been racking up the coefficient points. Malmo have just won in Karabakh. Elfsborg have beaten Roma. Did you ever believe in your wildest dreams that would happen? Djurgården have been picking up points. Häcken were very close to qualifying. Only got knocked out by Bundesliga opponents. Bodo Glimt beat Porto in the Europa League. I mean, that's as good as a Champions League win, really, in my book. Porto nearly knocked Arsenal out of the Champions League last season. Result. I bet it could. I mean, that was an incredible match. The roar at Asmira Stadion when those goals went in, they came from behind as well. I've seen some great nights up there for Bodo Glimt, but this is one of the best ones because I think people were just starting to not write them off, but thought this is not the Bodo Glimt version of, that beat Roma 6-1 and battered Celtic twice. So I think it was a reminder of people how good they are, Bodo Glimt. 7 points clear at the top of Eliteserien. The 6 games to go. But really, I think their focus is quite rightly going to be on European matches. They've got a trip to Manchester United coming up soon. And, I mean, who would... That's really going to be an interesting game, I think. I think we're going to see a battle between two diverse tactical managers there. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. They've got another trip to Portugal, I think. Braga, it might be. But... what a win. It put the Norwegian Eliteserien back on the map again. And
we'll come on to that part. Let's come on to that part too. Just to wrap up, like we said, Malmo could win the league this year. But Steve, I was going to say, Steve, before we go to the break, I was going to look at the table, but I don't think listeners have got the half an hour that I would need to look at the Conference League and European tables to actually find where Malmo are in that table because these leagues. We're going to have a big debate about these leagues at some point because, I don't know what's going on with that. Someone said, I saw that said that the fixture list looks like when you get to Stansted Airport and you're looking for your flight. I'm brilliant. There's so many teams and games. I mean, we'll get into
CBS. You watched the CBS thing with Kate Abdo or whatever she's called now, Jamie Carragher, Micah Richards. They have this massive. Have you seen it? This massive wall of like the table, and they're quite comical how they go about describing who's where. It's absolutely bonkers, really. But I actually quite like the new format.
Yeah, we'll talk about. I guess we can talk a little bit about that in part 2. But obviously, Malmo, with the result against Rangers as well, they're still in there. They got some big games, like you mentioned. But it should be maybe by the time you listen to the next show, we might have a longer chat about Malmo because they may well be champions of Sweden by the time we record next. But coming up in part 2, Steve, let's get into Eliteserien. I know for a fact people have been chomping at the bit. We've had a few texts and messages and things. People want to hear about the latest in Norway. So after this short break, get yourself a little orange juice or coffee and we will join you to talk about that. Welcome back to this episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. My name is Jonathan Faduba. I'm joined as always by Steve Wiss, our Norwegian expert. Steve, looking at the table in Eliteserien with 6 games to go. There's more games than in Sweden remaining. We have a 7-point gap between Brann in second and Bodo Glimt top. So, you can do the calculations there. The title's not done yet, but maybe Glimt's sort of edging away. Further 2 points back, you've got Mulder on 44 points in third, and you've got Viking in fourth. On 43 points. They even, I see Rosenborg have climbed up the table slightly since we last did a pod. They're now 5th on 40 points. So a few things to talk about here, really. Let's start with Glimt, obviously, because they are the main men. I see Hakon Evjen is obviously second in the assist charts. top of the scoring chart, sorry, are some Molde players, Christian Eriksen and Magnus Wolf Eikram. But in general, Glimt kind of running away with things, would you say? We're going to get it wrapped up, or is there still maybe a title race here to be contended with?
Well, do you know what is interesting, Jonathan, is even if they win all their remaining games, they would get 71 points, which is, well, I don't think they will win all the remaining games. I think we could be looking at quite a low points tally to win the league, actually. Maybe around 65, something like that, especially if they focus on Europe. And I think I said on some previous episodes this year, I think that certain teams like Brann especially might look back on this year and think maybe Glimt were vulnerable. But around mid-season, they had a brilliant start, Buda Glimt, like out of the traps so quickly. I think they won 6 of their first 7. But they did have a stagnant period mid-season where they were maybe a little bit vulnerable and other teams didn't really take enough advantage of it, in my opinion. And looking back, I think it's a really, it's a very strong league this year, the Eliteserien. The gap between top and bottom is much, much closer. But 7-point gap with a far better goal difference with 6 games to go. They do have to play. I think they've got to play Rosenborg. They've got Molde on the list, Fredrikstad. So it's not all a Tromsø away. Next game is a big derby in the north. So it's not completely a piece of cake, but they should have enough. Now, you got to think when push comes to shove. I mean, Brann would have to be faultless and they would have to really let slip a few times. So I think it's probably in the bag.
What would you say, Steve, for someone like maybe looking at the league, you might say, well, yeah, Glimt win it every year now, or not necessarily because it's not actually true. But is there a perception growing now that Glimt are kind of, they've almost started to cement themselves, haven't they? They're getting to that point now. Is the league, without me wanting to say boring, is it, dare I say, becoming a little bit predictable with Glimt?
People talk about Glimt now, just neutrally. I think in the Champions League qualifiers when they beat Red Star, the night when I injured my ankle, and my ankle still isn't great, by the way, then I was seeing tweets around saying, Buda Glimt, they're the champions of Norway, and they actually play an unbelievable football. Do you know what I mean? Things like that. I think now, if you ask someone in a pub, what's the top Norwegian team? Quite a few more would now say Buda Glimt or Molde as opposed to Rosenborg, just because they see them playing in Europe a lot more. Simple as that. And I think they are starting to get that reputation. You look at the transfers ins and out of the club. There's no one else really can match that apart from Molde at times. The amount of money they can spend on a player, the amount of money they're getting for a player. So it's incredible what they've built here under Kjetil Knutsen. If he had said to me he would still be here now 2 years ago, I would have said no chance. But somehow he's still here. We always say this, don't we? I don't know how long he's going to stay for now. Maybe he's there for life. I don't know, Jonathan. I think he's always wanted to get him in the Champions League group phase. Obviously failed this year. Whether or not he has the fight to continue that in the long term, let's see. But they are now clearly the top team, the top club in the nation.
I think one of the reasons I asked that is because it's really hard for a smaller club to not only win the league, but to then create a dynasty that establishes them as like it's almost like a changing of a brand, isn't it? I hate to say it, but dare I say it, Man City have done a similar thing. 10, 15 years ago, Man City were, Steve, I remember going to South America and when you say Manchester, there's only one team you're talking about. They don't even mention the second bit, just Manchester, which stood for United. And nowadays, I don't even know if Manchester might stand for City now, actually. And maybe people have forgotten United, but my point is, it takes a lot to establish a kind of a top team like that and have that continuity. And like you said, Knutsen is part of it. Do you think that within Norway, that other teams, is there like a challenger that maybe, and in England, for example, you had Liverpool a little bit, didn't really they only won one title, I guess, but, COVID title. Now you can argue maybe Arsenal a little bit, but is there actually a challenger? Or, Brann have done so well in recent years, of course, but Molde kind of, they've also slipped a little bit, haven't they, Stephen? It's kind of the sense that are we risking getting to a point where Glimt don't actually even have a challenger?
I mean, just from the finances, their market value even on transfer market, and this is always a really raw guide, these are a set of finances you wouldn't mind having your eyes over, Jonathan, because I think they're so well run at the top that the sort of team that every single penny's counted for really well, sort of thing. They get the best deals they can for players, both coming in and out of the club. But it's crazy how this has happened. I think there'll be some other clubs looking around and be like, how on earth has this happened? It's ridiculous. Mulder, I don't think.
Yeah, it is kind of that, isn't it?
I don't think Mulder can be too unhappy about where they are. They're a very consistent team. They're in Europe a lot. They're clearly well run. They've got decent money, and I think they're just kind of waiting for Glimt to drop off a bit, maybe to Knutson to leave or whatever. And they've got to be like, we're next in line. Brann have got to think that as well. Remember, in this same cycle, Brann were an Obos team, so that has not helped them. But Brann looked like they could rebound at any point in time. Rosenborg, I think they'll be back at some stage. But of course, the dynasty's changed. If you'd said to us in 2018, when we first started doing this podcast, Bodø Glimt would be the most marketable team in Norway by at least 10 million in terms of market value, and won 4 titles? Is it something like that? I mean, you'd have been like, what planet have you been on, Steve? I mean, it's crazy how it's become. And I think it would take some knocking off. Even if they lost the manager, I think they'd get a good one in. And the money that they've got at the club, that's going to take some serious self-explosion now. And you don't just lose that in, say, 1 year. That's the sort of thing that would take quite a long time to come down.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And, when you look at even the metrics and everything, Glimt just... I mean, the Porto game was incredible, really. I have to say that, some of their performances are, they're doing a good job as well. It's not just as, even getting a draw at Union Saint-Gilloise in the Europa League. It's, it's a massive development, isn't it, really, when you look at it? It's not just a fluke or kind of, the Roma game, that Roma time when they beat Roma 6-1, you could kind of look at that and say, well, they're just on the crest of a wave. But it seems like they're really now starting to properly sustain this dominance.
By the way, in this era, there's almost been like 3 different teams as well. They've had to cope with big departures, and they've had to bring players in. Returning players have come back. It's not like the same sort of core squad that's been in this 5-year period. I'd say it's been like three different rebuilds in a way. So it makes it all the more remarkable.
Yeah, and I mean they are actually top of their XG as well. Yeah, according to our partners, Wisecout, in their league, which is not like I suppose Vestergaard. Brann second, Viking third for expected goals, Mulder fourth, and then you've got sort of Stroms Godset in fifth, who are kind of maybe the underachievers in that sense. They've got 28 goals but 40.74 XG, which is slightly above Rosenborg, who have scored 40 goals exactly. Data there, like I say, provided by partners Wisecout. Steve, let's look at teams like Brann. I mean, that we're talking about sustaining dominance and sustaining growth. They've managed to do the similar, obviously promotion, and had a good year last year, and they've continued that on. By the way, just before we do that, Steve, just want to quickly mention about you talked about recruitment, and from a Swedish point of view, one big rumor doing the rounds at the moment is that Imam Yanyi is being chased by Bodø Glimt, the youngster who was previously at Everton, one of our centre watches in past years. It was a Hacken, and then obviously went to Everton and came back. It's now Mjällby. I think that would be a really smart signing if Glimt get him. I still really like him. But yeah, just wanted to get your thoughts on Brann, their development, Steve, and can they wrap up this season? Maybe just putting a bit of pressure on Glimt with the maybe distraction of Europe.
Well, they beat Glimt 2 rounds ago, 4-1. So they showed that they can certainly beat them on their day. I think Brann will look back to the mid-season again, just like it was in 2023. Where their mid-season results about July, they're not a good team in July, Brann. Why that is, I don't know. Around that period, it's just dropped too many points. They'll be gutted. Brann will feel they should be in the Conference League. They lost 3-0 to Astana in the second leg in Kazakhstan. It was a big shock. Astana are not what they once were. That was a big blow. But look, they should be able to put some pressure on them, but their own fixtures are not that easy either, by the way. If we look at Brann's fixtures remaining, they've still got Viking, Molde on the cards, Rosenborg away next. They've got Lillestrøm, who we're going to talk about them before the end of the show. That might not be such an easy game because they're fighting for their lives. Dagala for Goma there now. So I don't think Brann are going to, they've got 6 games left. I don't think they win all 6 either. I'm not even sure they win 5 of them. So that's why I think it's going to be quite hard to catch. I think for Brand, just get the silver medal, get yourself in the Europa League. In fact, actually, you might be getting the Champions League. The coefficient I think second place gets Champions League qualifying. So that's massive when you think about it. Yeah, focus on getting that silver medal, and it's worth that silver medal is worth a lot more of its weight in gold this year.
Yeah, and that is one talking point that we will need to address at some point. The growing rise in the teams and the coefficient. Sweden is also on the up recently with the results that they've had in Europe, and that's going to open doors potentially, Steve. And that was part of my project, actually looking at Sweden as a destination, and what do people outside of Europe or inside of Europe think of Sweden as a destination. And the leagues, I think the league's gaining credibility, Steve. And we've had this discussion before about maybe leagues like Netherlands and so on, other middle market leagues. There's an interesting conversation to be had there, but maybe it's not for today. I like what Brann have done. They say, obviously they've got that popularity aspect as well, haven't they? I was in Norway in May. Steve, as I mentioned, we had a little chat about that, didn't we, during the summer? And I watched Brann in a bar when the game was on TV. Which other teams? I mean, we're going to wrap this episode up by talking about the couple of signing, maybe players who've really stood out this season. But which other clubs, Steve, before we move on to the relegation battle, would you say have had a noteworthy season that you'll look back and say, well, or have something to play for? Where you're saying, they've done themselves a good job.
I'll tell you 3 teams I think deserve a lot of credit, right? And I've talked about 2 of them before: Fredrikstad and K from Oslo, the newly promoted teams. I think HamKam now actually have to be added to that discussion. 29 points on the board. They're pretty close to surviving now, and maybe one more point, one more win. And the reason I mentioned those 3 teams is because pre-season, a lot of the media prediction was for them to be quite poor. Fredrikstad a little bit of an outlier because there was more expectations on them, but I don't think anyone thought they'd be in the top 6 right now. And they lost their manager mid-season. If you had said that, at the start of the year that they were going to lose their manager mid-season, you would think either something's going really wrong, or, if things are going right, then they'll probably nosedive. So, I mean, where did I have them? I'm just looking back at my season predictions now. I actually had Fredrikstad in 9th. I predicted KFUM in 15th and HamKam 13th. And I think was being generous on KFUM and HamKam compared to a lot of the media. So I think all those 3 teams deserve a lot of credit. It's been a heck of a league this year. Anyone can beat anyone. And I think small margins have mattered. The really top coaching teams have stood out even better in a league like this, because every match means so much. And there's one thing all 3 have in common. So I think they're pretty well run as a club off the field. It's hard to comment sometimes. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but it feels like they are. And they're definitely on the field. All the managers and all the coaching have been top dollar, and they've got the maximum, probably the most points that they can get out of the team. And there's a lot of credit.
What are your thoughts, Steve, on the other teams like Rosenborg?
Yeah, they're in rebuild. I predicted them 7th, actually, which was higher than most. And they look like they're guaranteed, not guaranteed, but they're going to be top 6, I think, whatever. They could get into the European spots. I think they've come back well from a sort of an inconsistent start. Good home team, Rosenborg. They have been for a while. Won 9 out of 12 at home. And that's important for them. They're well supported there. They've got a grass pitch, which that's an advantage now. There's more pitches are artificial than ever. And I think their surface is a big advantage for them. Away from home, they haven't been that good really for quite some time, but they've won 2 of the last 3 on the road. And maybe that's an artificial problem at times for them. Some of their signings have come off. I think it's not a bad season for Rosenborg from where they were. I really don't. But they, as a club, they need to be back in the medals as soon as they can. And maybe this is the year that can sort of kickstart that. And what they need to be doing, Jonathan, they need to be ready to pounce when these 4 teams above them, if any of them have a drop off in the next 2 seasons, Rosenborg need to be there ready to pounce and take their spots.
Fantastic stuff. And before we wrap up, looking at the bottom of the table, Steve, it's getting tasty. 2 points separate the bottom 4. You got Lillestrøm bottom of the league. That is quite shocking to me. Odd, obviously, I think Lillestrøm lost their manager, didn't they, to Manchester United as a set-piece coach, for one. Odd, team that I've always had a little bit of a soft spot for, but, they've just kind of been floating around the league, haven't they, Steve? Never really making a huge impact. Now they're in danger of getting demoted. Sandefjord, 14th place. Goal difference separates them with Odd, 22 points. Haugesund, 23 points, Steve. Just out of it. Sarpsborg, 26 points in 12th. Then above them, you've got sort of Godset, Tromsø, Christiansen, and Hamkam doing quite well in 8th. By the way, shout out to Tom Dent. What's your perspective on the bottom of that? I mean, the teams I don't see, Steve, are K from Oslo and Fredrikstad in that conversation, as we just sort of briefly touched on. Promoted sides, again, doing quite a decent job, but who's going down, Steve?
I think 11th and up are going to be safe. I think Strom's Godset and above are safe. Not mathematically, and none of them teams will want to finish with 4 or 5 defeats in a row. They might be under pressure, but I think they'll be all right. I mean, this Lillestrøm, can you believe this? This is like a soap opera. 12 months ago, we were in the same position where a big team, Vålerenga, were down there. And we were like, how is this happening? This shouldn't be happening. I predicted Lillestrøm to be 5th this season, 5th place.
What has
I've always got that. I don't know. I mean, the Andreas Georgsen came in and had a mixed run of results, but he certainly didn't leave him in this sort of poor spot. What's happened now is, and you can't write this script. They have brought in Dag Eilev Fagermo 2 weeks ago to try and save them. The former Vålerenga manager, their big rivals, has come in to the club. He lost his first match in charge. It was a cup game against Molde, but a 2-1. There were some positive signs from that game. Vålerenga, by the way, they're promoted. As expected, they've rinsed the Obos-ligaen. They probably will win the league. They're up. Imagine if Vålerenga replaced Lillestrøm. I mean, he who laughs loudest, right? That said, I don't think Lillestrøm are gone by any means. If you look at their fixtures, there's winnable games. They've got Odd and Haugesund and Sandefjord at home. Now, that for me, that's got to be 9 points. If you want to survive, that's 9 points, and that'll be enough. Win those 3 games, you'll stay up. It's not as easy as that, is it? But with Fagermo in charge, I think you can get enough results for them. It's so tight down there. I'm not writing them off.
Yeah, next games this weekend, they got Fredrikstad away. Then they got Odd at home. Like you said, Haugesund at home. Those are 2 massive games. Then Brand away, Sandefjord, and then Glimt away. Steve, these 2 clubs just trade managers and trade, like, what is going on in these 2 clubs? I mean,
well, it's very unusual. I mean, Fagermo was obviously sacked by Vålerenga last season. I mean, I can't believe that he'd go somewhere like this. I couldn't believe Erik Bakker moved to Vålerenga, but maybe Bakker long term had the right idea. Maybe he got it right. I don't know. It's crazy stuff, isn't it? I actually want Lillestrøm to survive. I think we've got to see that fixture next season. Dag Eilev Fagermo against Geir Bakker. I think that would be. We want to see return of what Tifo comes out, don't we, for that match next year? I mean, maybe the Judas thing came out, didn't it, for Bakker? What would come out for Fagermo when the Lillestrøm travel to Vålerenga? They just feel like they trade managers, but it's such a tight battle. I mean, I can't call this race. 1 goal, in a big game could be the difference between teams that go down. But I do worry for Odd, and I do worry for Haugesund. I think both teams have been treading water for a while. Sandefjord always have that knack of surviving, don't they? And I could see Odd and Haugesund being 2 teams that end up in a bit of trouble.
So in that case, you think those 2 are the ones that will go, or?
Yeah, I'm going to predict Odd and Haugesund to go down. I mean, Haugesund, I've predicted this for a while, haven't I? To be honest, I just said one of these years they're going to get caught out. I actually predicted them 11th this year, and Odd 12th. But I did say, I think on the season preview podcast, that they would. If things go wrong, they could be in trouble. Wouldn't surprise me. And some bad transfers perhaps on both teams has maybe caught up with them for the last couple of years. Sandefjord still, for me, on paper, perhaps have one of the weaker squads, but they did reinforce well in the summer. It's like their transfers in and out this season, Sandefjord. It makes ridiculous viewing. You can never write them off either way. But, the likes of Sarpsborg aren't safe either. They're only a few points above the drop. The playoff, I think the playoff would be whoever finishes 14th would fancy the playoff again. The Eliteserien clubs have a great record in the playoff in general. And even the ones that have lost should never have lost. So it's really just avoid being the bottom two. You probably will be an Eliteserien team in 2025.
And final question, Steve, just before we wrap up. Got to head off soon, but it's been fantastic catching up with you. Just want to get your gauge on a couple of players that you would say you've been really impressed with this season. You mentioned a few teams. Who in Norway would you say has gone from, you could talk about, your Wisecat blog as well, although I know that one of them has left the league, but who has caught your eye, Steve, in the recent months?
I think two players this season have caught my eye. One player that you caught up with in Norway, Logie Thomason, left wing back at Strømsgodset. And I think if you look at his metrics, there's other players in his position that rank better, maybe Linnes or Saltvet, players like that. But I think consider the team he's been in, they are a big underachiever on the metrics. Strømsgodset, they should be doing a lot better. He's a big standout player, a key man for them there in the left wing back position, and I could see him going decent places. And the lad up front for K from Oslo, Nunes. I think no one saw this coming. 10 goals, 5 assists. He's up there. He's nearly one of the top scorers in the league, actually, I think. Off the top of my head, it might be one of the Molde guys, but I think Nunes has bagged double-digit goals. And he's proven himself. We've talked about this a lot. There's a lack of genuine number 9s in world football. He's a throwback to a number 9, a proper 9 who can score all types of goals. So I've got to give him a massive shout out. And at this moment in time, he would be making my team of the year if we had to do it after 24 games.
Do you know what? When you mentioned that, I just suddenly thought of Andy Carroll at Bordeaux and all the problems that have gone on there. You're right. There's no. We've talked about it before. I think you'll have a few scouts down there if he's as you describe him, because they're like gold dust these days, Steve, trying to find those elusive target man type 9s. But we'll wrap it up there. We are going to talk about a few more things coming out. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say, Steve, before we leave.
Yeah, Johan Nunes, he's the one to watch. He's 27 now, and that might seem old, but I've seen players develop late before. Steve Sauvedon in France was a massive example of that. He came into his prime when he was like 30, 31. So it can still happen. And 27 is not a bad age. Really big fan of him. But yeah, just to close, been great to have be back on the show with you, Jonathan, here on the NFP. And hopefully we've said this all year, haven't we? But hopefully we get a bit more consistent content. But yeah, we've got a lot of work until January. The teams are in action in Europe there. So hopefully see you next week or not too long after.
Yeah, well, I don't have an excuse of doing a intense degree anymore, so at least I've got less excuses. But I'm off to read the Conference League table now, which should take me most of the night. So
that'll take you till next week.
We can pick that conversation up from there. But yeah, it's great to see your face again and chat. Listeners, obviously, you can get us on Twitter or X at Nordic Footpod as always. YouTube as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget as well, if you want to ask us questions, you can always post your questions on those two platforms. We do have a Facebook page, but I don't know where that's gone now. We barely use Facebook, do we? Still?
Facebook? I don't even use it anymore, hardly.
And we're not really on TikTok yet. So
we need to be on TikTok, don't we, or Instagram? Yeah. They're the two big ones now. Times have changed.
Gonna have to get you on that one, but really great to be involved again on the podcast, and see you all again soon. Lots of stuff happening in the next few weeks with the finale of the season coming, so we'll have plenty to talk about. But that's all from now. So thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Take care, y'all. See you next time. Goodbye.